A Voyage to Lilliput. Chapter 1. Gulliver is shipwrecked and captured. My father had a small estate in Nottinghamshire. I was the third of 5 sons. When I was 14 years old, my father sent me to Emmanuel College in Cambridge, where I studied for 3 years. But the cost of keeping me there was too great, so I was bound as an apprentice to Mr. James Bates, a highly respected surgeon in London, and I continued with him 4 years. My father now and then sent me small sums of money, and I spent them on learning navigation and other parts of mathematics useful to those who travel, as I always believed it would be my fortune to do. When I left Mr. Bates, I went to Leyden, where I studied medicine, knowing it would be useful to me on long voyages. Soon after my return from Leyden, Mr. Bates recommended me to be the ship's doctor on the Swallow, a ship on which I stayed 3 years and a half, making voyages to the Levant and other parts. The last of these voyages was not very profitable, and I grew weary of the sea. I intended to stay home with my wife and family, but after 3 years of little success in my practice, I accepted an offer to sail to the South Seas as the ship's doctor on the Antelope. We set sail from Bristol on May 4th, 1699. At first we prospered, but as we sailed into the East Indies, we were driven by a violent storm to the northwest of Van Diemen's Land. 12 of our crew died from overwork and ill food. The rest were in very weak condition. On the 5th of November, which is the beginning of summer in those parts, the weather was hazy. Seamen spied a rock near the ship, but the wind was so strong it drove us directly onto it. We immediately split. 6 of the crew, of whom I was one, let down a boat into the sea and rowed clear of the ship and the rock. We rowed about 3 leagues, units of distance ranging from 2.5 to 4.6 miles each, till we were able to work no longer. We trusted ourselves to the mercy of the waves. In about half an hour, we were overturned by a sudden flurry from the north. What became of my companions in the boat, or those who escaped to the rock were left in the ship, I cannot tell, but I assume that they were all lost. For my own part, I swam and was pushed forward by wind and tide. I often let my legs drop and could find no bottom. But when I was almost gone and able to struggle no longer, I found I could touch the bottom, and the storm died down. I walked nearly half a mile before I got to the shore at about 8 o'clock in the evening. I went on for nearly half a mile, but could not discover any sign of houses or inhabitants. I was extremely tired. I lay down on the grass, which was very short and soft, where I slept sounder than I had ever slept in my life. When I awoke, it was just daylight. I attempted to rise, but was not able to stir. As I happened to lie on my back, I found my arms and legs were strongly fastened to the ground, and my hair, which was long and thick, was tied down. I also felt several slender cords across my body, from my armpits to my thighs. I could only look up. The sun began to grow hot, and the light bothered my eyes. I heard noise about me, but I could see nothing except the sky. In a little time, I felt something alive moving on my left leg. Advancing gently forward over my breast, it came almost up to my chin. Bending my eyes downward as much as I could, I perceived it to be a human creature, about 6 inches high, with a bow and an arrow in his hands, and a quiver on his back. In the meantime, I felt at least 40 more of the same kind following the first. I was in the utmost astonishment, and roared so loudly they all ran back in fright, and some of them, I was told later, were hurt by leaping from my sides. However, they soon returned, and one of them, who ventured so far as to get full sight of my face, lifting up his hands and eyes by way of admiration, cried out in a shrill, clear voice, "Hikina digul!" The others repeated the same word several times, but I did not know what they meant. I lay all this while in great uneasiness, struggling to get loose. I broke the strings and wrenched out the pegs that fastened my left arm. At the same time, with a violent pull that gave me excessive pain, I loosened the strings that tied down my hair on the left side. I was just able to turn my head about 2 inches, but the creatures ran off a second time before I could seize them. There was a great shout in a very shrill accent, and when it was over, I heard one of them cry aloud, "Tolko Fodak!" In an instant, I felt above 100 arrows on my left hand, which pricked me like needles. They shot another flight into the air. Many fell on my body, though I did not feel them, and some on my face, which I immediately covered with my left hand. When the shower of arrows was over, I was groaning with pain, and I tried again to get loose. They let go another volley, larger than the first, and some of them attempted to stick spears at me. But by good luck, I had a leather vest on, which they could not pierce. I thought it prudent to lie still. My intention was to continue so until night, when, since my hand was loose, I could easily free myself. As for the inhabitants, I believed I might match the greatest armies they could bring against me if they were all the same size as him that I saw. When the people saw I was quiet, they shot no more arrows. But because the noise increased, I knew their numbers were greater. About 4 yards from me, near my right ear, I heard a knocking for more than an hour, like people at work. Turning my head that way as far as the pegs and strings would permit me, I saw a stage erected about 1.5 feet from the ground. It was capable of holding 4 of the inhabitants with 2 or 3 ladders to mount it. From there, one of them, who seemed to be an important person, made a long speech, of which I understood not a syllable. Before he began, he cried out 3 times, Lengro, Deho, San. These words were later explained to me. Immediately, about 50 of the inhabitants cut the strings that fastened the left side of my head, which gave me the liberty of turning it to the right and seeing the person speaking and his gestures. He appeared to be middle-aged and taller than the other 3 who stood within him, one of whom was a page who held up his train. He acted every part of an orator, and I could observe many gestures of threats and others of promises, pity, and kindness. I answered in a few words, but in the most humble manner. Having not eaten a morsel for hours before I left the ship, I put my finger frequently on my mouth, even though it may not be good manners, to show I wanted food. The Hergo, so they call a great lord, understood me very well. He came down from the stage and commanded that several ladders be placed at my sides, on which 100 inhabitants mounted, and walked towards my mouth with baskets full of meat. The emperor had ordered these prepared when he first heard news of me. I observed there were the flesh of several animals, but could not tell them apart by taste. There were shoulders, legs, and loins, shaped like those of mutton, but smaller than the wings of a lark. I ate them 2 or 3 at a mouthful, and took 3 loaves at a time, that were about the bigness of musket bullets. They brought food as fast as they could, showing astonishment at my appetite. Then I made a sign to show I wanted drink. They found that a small quantity would not satisfy me, and being ingenious people, they rolled one of their largest hogsheads, large barrels, toward my hand, and beat out the top. I drank it all in a gulp, which I could easily do, for it hardly held half a pint. It tasted like a wine from Burgundy, but more delicious. They brought me a second hogshead, which I drank in the same manner. I made signs for more, but they had none to give me. When I had performed these wonders, they shouted for joy and danced on me, repeating Hekina de Gul several times. They made a sign for me to throw down the 2 hogsheads, but first warned the people below to stand out of the way. When they saw the vessels in the air, there was another shout of Hekina de Gul. I was often tempted when they were passing back and forth on my body to seize 40 or 50 that came within reach and dash them against the ground. But I now considered myself bound by the laws of hospitality. They had treated me with so much expense and magnificence. I was amazed at the fearlessness of the tiny mortals who dared to climb and walk on me, while I had one hand free, without trembling at the very sight of how huge I must appear to them. After some time, there appeared a person of high rank sent by his imperial majesty. He advanced up to my face with about a dozen attendants. He spoke for about 10 minutes. He did not show any anger, but often pointed towards the capital city, where I must be taken. I answered in a few words, but to no purpose. I made a sign to show that I wanted my liberty. It seemed he understood me well enough. He shook his head and held his hand in a way to show I would be carried as a prisoner. He made other signs, too, to let me understand I would have meat and drink and good treatment. I thought once more about attempting to break my bonds, but when I felt the stings from their arrows on my face and hands, which were all blistered and had many darts still sticking in them, and seeing that their numbers had increased, I let them know they could do with me as they pleased. Then the Hergo and his attendants left with cheerful faces. Soon I heard a shout, and the cords on my left side were relaxed enough that I could turn on my right side. Before this, they dabbed my face and hands with ointment, very pleasant to smell, that took away the sting of their arrows. These circumstances caused me to fall asleep, and I slept about 8 hours. I later learned the emperor had ordered his doctors to put a sleeping powder in the hogshead of wine. It seemed from the first moment I was discovered, the emperor was informed, consulting his advisers. He decided I should be tied as I was, given plenty of meat and drink, and a vehicle made to carry me to the city. These people are excellent mathematicians and engineers because of the encouragement of the emperor, who was a patron of learning. He had several vehicles for hauling trees and other heavy weights. 500 carpenters set to work to build the biggest vehicle they ever had. It was a wood frame raised 3 inches off the ground, about 7 feet long and 4 feet wide, moving on 22 wheels. It was brought parallel to me as I lay. The difficulty was to raise me and place me in the vehicle. 80 poles, each 1 foot high, were erected, and very strong cord fastened to bandages were put under my neck, hands, body, and legs. 900 of the strongest men pulled up these cords by pulleys fastened on the poles. In less than 3 hours, I was raised on the vehicle and tied fast. All the time this happened, I was asleep. 1,500 of the emperor's largest horses, each about 4.5 inches high, pulled me toward the city, which was half a mile away. About 4 hours after we began our journey, I was awakened by a very ridiculous accident. The carriage was stopped to adjust something that was out of order. 2 or 3 curious young natives climbed up very softly on my face, and one of them, an officer of the guards, put the sharp end of his half-pike, spear-like weapon, up my left nostril, which tickled my nose like a straw and made me sneeze violently. It was 3 weeks before I knew why I woke up so suddenly. We made a long march and rested at night with 500 guards on each side of me, half with torches and half with bows and arrows ready to shoot me if I stirred. At sunrise, we continued our march. By noon, we arrived outside the city gates, and the emperor and his court came out to meet us. His officers would not allow His Majesty to expose himself to danger by climbing on my body. The carriage stopped in front of an ancient temple, the biggest in the kingdom. A murder had happened there some years before, so it was no longer sacred and had been abandoned. In this building, I was to lodge. Its gate was about 4 feet high and 2 feet wide. I could easily creep through. On each side of the gate was a small window about 6 inches from the ground. Through the left window, the emperor's blacksmith passed 91 chains, which were locked to my left leg with 36 padlocks. Opposite the temple, on the other side of the highway, was a turret at least 5 feet high. Here the emperor climbed with many of his lords to have a chance to view me. I could not see them. More than 100,000 inhabitants came out of the town for the same purpose, and no fewer than 10,000 climbed upon my body many times. But soon a proclamation was issued that forbid climbing on me on pain of death. When the workmen saw that it was impossible for me to break loose, they cut the strings that bound me. I rose up in as sad a mood as I have ever had in my life. The noise and astonishment of the people at seeing me stand up and walk cannot be expressed. The chains that held my leg were about 2 yards long and let me walk back and forth around in a semicircle and creep in and lie at my full length in the temple.